Alright, so I'm going to show you guys how I strain my H braces. I use what's called a double figure 8. I'll go around this post, through the middle of the H brace, around, through the middle, around, and I'll do that 2 times. So instead of having just a single figure 8, I do a double figure 8. This is not the ideal H brace. I kind of like to do this before the fence is built, but what I had here was I had a creek that was fenced off, and I ended up changing it and moving my fence where the cows could access the creek, and I kind of just built this H brace in the middle after the fact, and it's actually built out of the smaller post. I normally use the 7 to 8 inch post from Southern States. This is built out of the 4 to 5 inch post, and so it's not as long, because these are 7 foot and I normally use 8 foot. But I like to do things in order to eliminate guesswork. And so for me, in general, as a rule of thumb, if I'm using 8 foot brace post, then I pace off 15 paces of wire. So I basically just roll my wire out, I step off 15 paces, and I cut it. That allows me to do my double figure 8 and have a couple feet of wire left over. When you're doing these, you don't want to get stingy with the wire and not give yourself enough room, because if you do that, then what ends up happening is you don't have enough wire to run back through your strainer, and that makes it a really big problem. For me, I'd much rather waste a couple feet of wire than to do that. So the first thing that we need to do when we're straining our H brace is we need to put us a staple at the bottom of the end post. So on this little fence run, the fence is going this way. This is the last post in the run. It is our end post, and we're going to put a staple at the bottom of that. Now, I would not recommend driving that staple all the way through or all the way in tight. If you want to drive it tight, do it after you're done. But you need a little bit of room so that wire can wiggle in and out, okay? So now we're going to run our wire. Now, it's I'm very picky about how I run my wire. I'm picky about how my fence looks. I mean, I want it to be good and strong, but it needs to look good too. I don't want to be embarrassed when people come around here looking at my fence. I want them to look at the fence and be like, man, that's a nice job. So one of the things that you need to do if you want these double H braces to look good and everything to be what I consider symmetrical, you need to be conscious of how you're wrapping your wire, and I'm going to show you what I mean. So we'll take one end, and this is a long piece of wire. I don't know if it's 15 paces or not. This was a scrap piece I had laying on the ground. We're going to take our wire, and I run one of the loose ends through the staple that I just drove. And I pull it to about halfway or 2/3 diagonal up towards my next post. This will be the wire that I'm going to put my strainer on. So we're just going to lay that down. Now we're going to take the rest of this wire, and since it's coming around the back side of the fence, we have to go through the middle, and we want to wrap it around the front side of this fence post, okay? Now on this fence post, where the wire is going to sit on the height, it's going to sit on top of our brace pin. So when we built this H brace, we drove a 5-inch brace pin on this end. We left it sticking out about 2 inches. We took a 10-inch brace pin. We drilled a hole all the way through this post. We drilled the hole between the level of our 5th wire and our 4th wire based on the mark on our guide stick. There's a video on that on the channel. And we slid our brace pin in here. I pre-drilled holes in each end of this horizontal post here. and then I just drove the 10-inch brace pin all the way into this horizontal post. Now I left about 1 inch or so of the brace pin sticking out, and so when we build this, or when we strain this H-brace, we're going to leave this wire, it's going to actually sit on top of that brace pin, and that's what's going to hold this end of the wire up. So when we're wrapping this wire around this post, we need to make sure, since this fence is already built, we need to make sure that this brace wire stays between number 5 and number 4 of our fence wires, or we're not going to be able to get it up here, and it's going to cause a problem. Alright, so we got that one wrapped around front. I'm in the bushes. Alright, so we got a wire coming around behind this one, in front of that one, behind that one. Now we got to go in front of this one, through our staple. Alright, we're going to pull that. Get all of most of our slack out. Okay, so now we have this loose wire, and this is where I talk about you want to make sure things are symmetrical. Now, if I just take this wire and go straight on through and go back around here and bring it back out to connect to my strainer, here's what's going to happen. The first time I went around this way, these wires, you can separate them, okay? So my wire that's coming from the back side of this post up to here is actually underneath the wire that's coming around the back side of this post and going that way. If I am not careful, what will happen is I'll bring the second time around, I'll come around this way, and I'll take and put the wire that's going from the bottom of this post to the top of this one, I'll just run it through, and what I'll have is I'll have on my two diagonals, I'll have one wire, then another wire, then another wire, and they will not be separated. This makes a lot more sense when you're doing it. You'll just have to, hopefully you can follow along. So what I want to do, and I'll show you in just a minute what I'm talking about. What I want to do is I want to remember which wires are on which layer or which level. So I know that the wire, the first time around, the wire that come around the back side of this post and went up this way is below the wire that come around the back side of this one and went that way. So whenever I do my second run, I'm going to make sure that I take the second wire coming around behind this one underneath the wire that just went around behind this one. And I'll show you what all that does in just a minute. So we're going to find this wire. We're going to take it underneath. We're going to go back up through between 4 and 5. And keep pulling our slack out. Alright, now our double figure 8 is pretty much done. So now what we have to do is we have to add our strainer to this other end. Now we're going to connect our strainer to our fence wire with a crimp sleeve, and you have to put the crimp sleeve on first because you're going to bend this wire. So we slide our crimp sleeve on. It's a double crimp sleeve. I use the long one so I can crimp them 2 times. Again, I like to do things the same way every time so everything matches. So for me, what I've done, I take my fingers, I spread them out like that, okay? My hands like that. Between my pinky and my thumb, about 6 or 7 inches, okay? I take and put my pinky at the end of the wire. I go down, mark where my thumb is, and I bend it. So now I have a hook. Every single strainer that I have put on all my fence is just like this, so they all look the same. It's not necessary I'm just OCD and I think it looks good. So once we do that, we're going to take our strainer. I kind of like to just kind of hold the wire loose in my hand to see which way this thing is naturally going to lay. Because if you twist this wire here and then you stick your strainer on here with the tension spring and the flap up, and you do that, and then when you let go, it's actually going to flip it upside down, okay? And I don't like that either. I want them all to be the way they're supposed to be. So I like to let the wire just kind of hang, see which way that it's going to lay naturally, and then I slide the strainer on that way. After you get the strainer on, just squeeze the wire together here on the end and then slide your crimp sleeve up on. I'm not too particular about where the crimp sleeve goes, but I do like to have some wire hanging out the end. Okay, now we're going to take your set of crimpers, open them up, and then you're going to crimp the wire, or crimp the crimp sleeve 2 times. So there's once, slide down just a little bit, 2 times, okay? That's plenty. You might not even need to do it 2 times, but I do. Okay, so we'll lay that there, go back around the back. Now, we also want to be thoughtful of this wire as well, okay? So this wire's coming around this way. We need to find the other wire that's coming around this way, which is this one, and make sure they're on the same level or the same layer. So now, on this double figure 8, and I'm going to show you a close-up in a minute, I have these 2 wires that are running from the bottom of this post on the front to the top of this post on the back. I've got them on top. The wires that are running from the back side of this post to the top side on the front of this post are on the bottom. So my double figure 8 is like this. I can separate it. It just looks nice and clean, okay? So I've got that done. I'm going to find the end, adjust my strainer. I like to go from the bottom up through the top, and we're going to start pulling this wire and get all this slack out, or a lot of it out. Now one thing you can do is if you just got a hold of this one wire, you can take, what I like to do is take the loose end, the tail end that you're pulling through, and just kind of hold the strainer and bend it around. Then you can take and just pull back on this wire, and it's one wire, and it'll pull a lot of your slack out. Now, we want to come up here to this brace pin, make sure we get our wires on top of that. You want to get those wires on top of that before you, what am I trying to say? You want to get them before you go to tighten it, because once you get a lot of this slack out and get it tight, if these wires are on the bottom or way down low, you'll never get them above this brace pin. So you want to get them above there kind of early. Pull that out. Now I've got more slack. I can just push this wire on through some, and again, just bend it down tight. Wrap it around your strainer and it'll hold it, okay? Now if you'll leave yourself enough slack on your wire, when you wrap and bend that wire around that strainer, you can actually push the wire back up through, and you'll be able to reach with your Nipix pliers. You'll be able to reach in there and cut off all the loose slack, leaving just a small hook that will actually hold the wire in your strainer. Okay? Now from here, if you want to adjust sometimes it's a pain to do it, but you just have to just push and pull on these wires, fish them through. There we go. You can pull them through and try to get your, I pulled it off. You can try to get your strainer close to the middle if you'd like. I like to try to get them in the middle, as close as I can anyway. So now what you're going to do is you're just going to start straining a little bit. But don't tighten it all the way, and I'm going to show you why. So just start to tighten. Okay? Kind of pull some more of your slack out. Tighten some more. All right, so we got it a little bit snug. Now let me get the camera and I'm going to show you up close what you want to make sure of before you really get to cranking down on this H-brace. All right, so here's our two wires. This is on the staple on the bottom of our end post. If you look, here's our two wires. You see how those wires are crossed? If you do not get those wires uncrossed and get them sitting parallel with one another, as you tighten, one of these wires is going to squeeze down on top of the other wire. And what will happen is on your double figure eight, you're going to have one of the figure eight diagonal sets is going to be tight. The other diagonal figure eight set is going to be very, very loose. And you'll never get both of them tight, and they'll never look symmetrical. And over time, your whole bracing system is probably going to weaken. So you want to make sure that you get these right. Now on this one, I'm just going to pull this wire here up. It's kind of hard to do holding the camera. All right, so I pulled that wire up. Now if you look, I've got one wire that sits on top of the other, okay? So this wire here, you can see, is on top of the other one. That's what you want. You do not want those wires crossed. Now let's check the other side. Okay, so see here, that's what I'm talking about, how those are crossed. So we don't want that. So we want to try to figure out which one would be the easiest. So all I'm going to do is grab these wires and flip this one up under. All right, so now, see how they're separated? That's what you want. Do not let those wires get crossed. Take it from me, learn from my experience. It'll really save you some time. And what it'll do, ultimately, it's going to prevent you from having to take this whole thing apart and restrain it, okay? Here's the other thing that I was talking about, and I'll show you again in just a little bit. These wires are separated on our double figure eight because we were cognizant of what we were doing, okay? And I'll show you that again in just a minute once I get it good and tight. All right, so here's the final product. After I strained it tight, you can see the wires are on top of each other. A little bit diagonal, it kind of looks like, but they're on top of each other, and they're sitting on top of that brace pin, okay? And you can actually, in this view, you can see the brace pin is driven from here all the way through this post into this post, okay? So those sit on top of there. Here's our double figure eight, and by double figure eight, you can now see that it's a diagonal wire that does a figure eight, crosses right there, and it's a double figure eight because it's going around 2 times, okay? So it's got 2 wires. There's our crimp and our crimp sleeve, there's our strainer. And right here where it goes across, this is what I was talking about. See how I can separate those and move those around? The only reason that I can do that is because I was cognizant and thoughtful of how my wires were coming around. When I was trying to tell you, you want both the wires on this diagonal, make sure they're both on the same level. And the wires on this diagonal, make sure they're both on the same level. And then that way, you know, they're all separated. It's probably not necessary. I just think it looks cleaner and it makes for a much, much more professional look, okay? So there's that. And then when we come down here, there is our wire there. And they're pulled up tight against the staple, but they're not crossing, and everything is good and tight. Now, I will come back and I will tighten that staple up a little bit. I'll drive it in a little bit more now that I've got this wire pulled, but like again, you don't want to do that beforehand. Now on my fence, you can see this double figure eight here is touching this bottom wire. That's not a problem for me because on my fence I have what's called a hot ground, and I have a hot ground fence or a hot ground system, and wires 1, 3, and 5 are all ground wires, and wires 2 and 4 are hot wires. So basically, if a cow or calf tries to stick their head between the wires and they touch 2 wires, they're basically touching both the posts on the electric fence charger. And if you've ever done that, you know how powerful that shock is. They're touching the entire ground system of the fence and the hot wire at the same time. It's going to burn them up. So they hopefully will not try to do that again after they do it one time. The fence shock's pretty good as it is, but it will really eat you up if you touch both those wires at the same time. So with my double figure 8 touching this wire, if anything, it just grounds the system more. So it's because that wire is connected to these wood posts that are driven in the ground, so it's, you know, it's not going to hurt my fence at all. If anything, it may just increase the grounding power. So that is how I do my H braces. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up, and we'll do some more videos on fencing as the year rolls on.